I've made a hint at what I said in one of my earlier episodes of the podcast, where we think a certain way and we have all sorts of weird thoughts in our mind to justify why we think a certain way. And of course, I couldn't help but listen to one of my brothers in Atlanta say the same thing when it comes to quote unquote intercultural relationships. As, of course, they still use interracial over there, but really it should be called intercultural. And this is not me trying to say how or what you should not call it. Really, that is up to you. But when it comes to that word, it's really always portrayed as negative and rarely as a positive, because that would incline your stepping out of a comfort zone. All right, and or you're stepping out of the comfort zone of other people, comfort zones of a narrative that has been portrayed. And I've listened to many different people on that particular subject, including a one called Dr. Umar Johnson, who really detests um, intercultural relationships. And really, if you listen to any of the stuff he talked about on the Breakfast Club, which is a show I still watch and still love to watch, but really had all sorts of ways to justify why having intercultural relationships is wrong. But really, is that really the case, or is that just his justification of why he wants a certain narrative to put out there? Meaning, of course, intercultural relationships are bad, and here is why. And I've had the same conversation with one of my brothers, and he really has a narrative, and I don't know if he's changed it since then. I love him the same way. I love all beings on this planet. I really have nothing against anyone, really, not even against Dr. Umar Johnson. But really, as I started to listen to this particular brother's story, which what happened on Instagram Live, where really he explained to me the narrative of why he not necessarily detested, but did not approve of intercultural relationships, according to, having a narrative absorbed, of course, through his experiences and his environment in his system, that hey, intercultural relationships are bad because you're taking away from the African descendant women, and you're approving one beauty standard over another. Now, I've made a video on this before, and there's only so much you can talk about a particular subject, of course. I've had justifications in my brain, not necessarily on intercultural relationships, but why I wasn't worthy of having the love I would have in general. And it didn't necessarily had to do with the environment I was in, because the environment I was in when it comes to any type of relationship or any type of human contact was toxic to begin with. So there, I was an island boy, so small. And again, this is nothing to diss the islands about, but small islands more or not have small minds, and I always found it strange that I was in an environment that was so limited, especially thinking about relationships in general, but also intercultural relationships as well. Because really, the reason, again, I say the term intercultural relationship is like you're not exchanging anything other than a perspective of thinking living and behaving according to a set environment that you grew up in, you know, and that can have, you know, spiritual reasons. It can have again, you know, religious, whatever you want to call it, you know, in between. I did a video on that as well. And there are so many things that are exchanged that have nothing to do with, you know, DNA in general. Plus, you know, we're all one race, which is the human race. So, but coming back to this particular brother's mindset on the issue is that I could clearly see as I asked him to explain it to me, because like, hey, I'm a multicultural kid. All right, I was born out of an intercultural relationship. So, and this is not to promote or denounce any type of narrative whatsoever. I do believe we actually have to change these terms in order to have people coming together be a positive thing. And every attempt that is made to bring people together, especially in the current social media we're living in, is to dissect people, put them all in a box and put them all in a group, or have a narrative put out about people who really don't care as long as they're in love. But again, as I talked to this particular brother of mine, I could see it really had less to do with how he thought about the situation, as he had other people's thoughts in his mental system, which, because of course, if you're stuck in a particular environment, you're just not going to get out of that mindset really easily. And especially for a lot of people who are stuck in one place for a very long time and not have that broader perspective. Because even though, you know, this is why we need multicultural societies, because you can talk to anyone and have a completely different perspective on a particular topic or a particular type of subject, and it doesn't have to really correlate with one another, but just having these different perspectives can give you enough pieces to put the puzzle together in order to discover the truth. Not your truth, because your truth is limited. A personal truth is like an opinion. It's limited. All right? Because having your truth has having your narrative be the better one. So whatever narrative is being put there on intercultural relationships is really promoting a narrative that fits the individual speaking it. And that could be whether good or bad. Now, the reason for me coming from an intercultural household was such a struggle, because even at any different type of level, whether it be just regular conversation, or whether it be politics, or whether it be religion, or whether it be socially, you were always put in a position as a kid coming from a multicultural household to pick a side. I don't want to pick a side. All right? I just want to live my own life and not be put into a certain type of narrative. Especially not one that is definitely not my own, but suits your purpose of putting out a narrative being a benefit or not as to why being in an intercultural relationship or coming from an intercultural household is bad or not. You know? But speaking to this brother from Atlanta that I was talking about, I could really recognize that it wasn't necessarily his thoughts, but really the thoughts of an environment, as like I said, he could not get out of. And I asked him, was like, but what's your real reason why you detest why you dislike intercultural relationships? And you find it very surprising how often or not in a conversation people give their own answer. And what it boiled down to was really jealousy, envy, whatever you want to call it. You know, they say, if you watch that Kevin Spacey movie, not that he has a very good name out in the last couple of years, but one of the movies he did, I remember, with Morgan Freeman, you know, and Brad Pitt. I think it was Seven. I think the movie was called Seven. but I could be wrong. But it's like, hey, it's about the 7 deadly sins, right? And saying that envy is the greatest sin of them all. Like all of the things, all it really boils down to, all the narratives for um, geographical division, um, cultural division, religious division, any type of division amongst ourselves in the social, cultural aspect that we're living in is boiled down to jealousy. And I really discovered after talking to this particular brother that it really didn't have to do with his personal issue, it had to do with jealousy. And it's the same thing I've seen when it comes to women. Why are women being called sluts and being slut shamed and really being called all these narratives? Because really, it boils down to not that you hate a woman for expressing herself openly and having her sexual freedom expressed. It's really because they're not doing that with you. And really, when it boiled down to this particular brother, but I've seen it happen in other places too, where really intercultural relationships aren't necessarily a bad thing, except to the person's own individual narrative, which really boils down to that he isn't happy with his current relationship status, or he is not happy with the current relationship he's in. Could be both. I'm not talking about this particular brother right now, but I'm talking about that in general, where really it boiled down to jealousy. And really, when you strip away other people's thoughts in a conversation about a certain type of subject or a certain type of narrative that's being promoted out there in the world, you really figure out, after having a decent conversation with certain type of people, why they really think the way they think about a particular subject, and why that type of thinking really really promotes set behavioral patterns and actions. Because really, in my environment too, this narrative was put on all the relationships that I wanted to pursue or had tried to pursue. Oh, you shouldn't date, for example, uh, a Russian person just because. You should not date a Colombian woman just because. And it's like, who is putting this narrative out there? And often or not, it's just people who are not happy in whatever situation they're in. So whatever you can have that they don't want you to have, they just put it in there. Which is really why you should be careful about who you're spending time with, who you let into your environment. Because often or not, if you don't think for yourself, if you don't have your own authentic ways of thinking and why you're thinking the way you're thinking and how or why not that influences your behavior, ultimately really boils down to jealousy, envy, and certain people in your environment thinking that they really have your best interest in heart when really they just block you out all the way. I've had that recently too. I've had to block out certain people that you outgrow, or you realize that they don't have your best interest in heart. And especially when it comes to the subject, look, man, love who you love. All right, if you're an if you're an African, all right, descendant, and you just happen to have a extreme amount of attraction for Australian women, all right, or Asian oriented people, just go nuts, bro. Sure, don't let anyone else's narrative dictate who or not you should love. If we let those narratives run out, we would have never have the diversity that we have right now. And honestly, we're for multicultural relationships, if we weren't from multicultural states, we would not have the beauty that all of this world has to offer. And matter of fact, I wouldn't be here either. So really, it really boils down to love who you love. And certain people, they just want you to not love. They want you to not be loved, because really it has to do with their own insecurities. And rather than dealing with that, especially on many other topics, but to this one in particular, they just don't want you to love. And they'll do and say whatever you can to have a narrative that you should not love who you should love. Regardless. I never really had uh, a preference when it comes to how a woman of my dreams should look like. More than often or not, it's just being portrayed out there. Oh, because you look a certain way, you should only be attracted to certain women. And that was in an ABBA and Preach video as well. Great shout out to those guys too. You know, they're doing good work out there, and you know, big fan, and hope they keep it up as well. And especially when the video also, like, I didn't watch the whole video of an African descended woman saying that I saw this fine African guy, but he looks like he's probably into European girls, which is really like you're going off of assumption that that's who they're into. And they did a very good job in really explaining that, and that is because I've went through the same thing. People think because you look a certain way, or you're dressed a certain way, or you behave a certain way, that you only are after a particular type of women. All right? With set standards, or set attributes, or set looks, which really should not matter. And even with some of the women I've had in my life, not that there were too many, because honestly, as much as like I said, as much as you can talk about relationships, as much as you can read other people's perspectives on relationship, until you really get into the whole dating sphere, unless you really get into what it's like to be around different people, or to date around with different people, regardless, you know, your orientation or your preference or whatever. But just love who you love, but just never forget to love yourself in the process. And knowing yourself is loving yourself. Because when you know and love yourself, you know that no bullshit from the outside world, you know, is going to interfere with who you really are, with what your authentic self is, and what you're here to do on this earth to do, which is really to live your life to the fullest and most best of your being, which is all I can hope for everyone in this world. And never let other people or the society that you're in dictate who you should or should not love. I think even in the future, you know, right now it's very big that religious factors get in there, or other factors. I'll tell you one, for example, right? I dated a girl, she looked just like me. I was vegan, she wasn't. We still made it work for a very long time. Granted, we're not together now, but it definitely wasn't because of we had a constant debate of you should be vegan, or no, you shouldn't put those restrictions on me. No, just live and let live. You know, my diet has nothing to do with who others around me should be, and for that same reason, you should not be dictated who you can or cannot love. It should always be about, hey, whose energy am I really connected with? And even the term opposites attract can be, for a long time, if you're the one woman type guy, and I'm speaking for guys here in general, you know, this could easily apply for women, but, you know, I'm just giving a guy's perspective on this, which really boils down to, you know, before you love anyone else, just love yourself. And really, when I talked to this particular Atlantan brother of mine, it really boils down to not necessarily that he didn't love himself, because, you know, obviously, you know, he looked healthy, took very good care of himself, but it's like not knowing himself outside of what other people have told him that he should be, or how he should behave based on the environment that he's in. And really, I've seen a lot of people fall into that same trap, and really, I could easily fall into that trap again. Like I said, no matter how spiritually enlightened you are, or no matter how much knowledge you have, you can still make those mistakes. You can still fall into that trap. as loving and understanding as you think you are, you can still fall into the same trap from time and time again. And there's no shame in admitting that. Like, it's okay to have prejudice, really, because you need to be careful with who you hang out with, because not everyone is as trustworthy as they appear to be. But is that on an energetic level, or is it purely just because the way they look or the way they dress or they have their hair done? You know, which is why it's very important now to really get in touch with your emotions and your intuition, because you can get a lot of things wrong, but your intuition, your gut feeling about whether or whether not to follow someone to a car, or whether you should or should not hang out with a certain person, it really boils down to, hey, know thyself. Because once you know thyself and know thyself completely, you can easily tell others, like, hey, fuck off. You're not on my vibrational frequency. It doesn't have to be levels. It's just, you're not on my vibrational frequency. Just stay away. But it comes to knowing your boundaries and knowing when to exert your boundaries. And even that, I still have that lesson. Yeah, another lady